Hello and welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast, where we're connecting people and systems. We talk to brilliant minds from the world of education, manufacturing, public service, and beyond, exploring the dynamic interplay between people and the systems that drive their success, and discover how you can connect more dots in your own life and work. So, Luke, hello.
Hello, Sam. How are you?
What has excited you this week, Luke?
This week, I was at an event and two things excited me. Firstly, I'd never heard of Brad Keller, this young man who has self-taught to play the piano. And he stood up, introduced himself, said his story, which is an amazing, you know, overcoming adversity, and then played one of the most moving, beautiful pieces of music I've ever heard at the RSA. He owned the space. That's all I could say. Like everything was. So that was one thing that excited me today, this week. And the other thing, and this will resonate with our guest today, was that I was talking to some young people with care experience about their journeys through the care
Ah,
system,
yeah.
and it was just. I'm always like overwhelmed with how much knowledge and insight the people with lived experience have of their
Yeah.
systems, and just very flattered that they would share it with me, to be honest. So that's what excited me this week, Sam.
So that's excellent. What excited me this week was, do you know, since I've been doing this with you, I've actually started thinking more about systems. And that kind of excites me, but it also kind of disgusts me a little bit. The fact that how I'm not I like systems, but I like the people in the systems. So I'm kind of excited that it's expanding how I think, but I also don't like myself a little bit for it. Because it hurts my head. I'm too old. It hurts my brain. But without further ado, Luke, introduce our fabulous guest this week.
Well, our fabulous guest is Clive Grinner, and I think it's really hard to read out his CV because that would take out the rest of the podcast. And there's certain things I want to ask Clive directly. So I think I'm going to do it slightly differently and say I met Clive because two students on his RCA course said, we met this guy and he's helped us with our project. Clive, would you like to ask him to come and give a lecture? And Clive was like, sure, yeah, come on, Luke. And it was like it's very like rare to have someone just kind of trust their students and go, you know what? If you say he's the guy, bring him on kind of thing. And then like Clive like watched me talk, hadn't seen me, didn't know anything about me, but just let me do it kind of thing. And so like I think Clive is one of those people who is truly both system sensitive and is an open system and constantly exchanging energy with the world around him. So I'm absolutely delighted to have Clive on the show.
Wow, I had no idea I did all that. Thank you, Luke.
And the surprise thing about Clive is that he said it all started with his grandmother's dress shop. I think we need to know further about that, Clive.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. It's lovely to be here. Lovely to see you both. Um, yes, this was a memory really that slowly dawned on me that I owe everything I've ever done to my grandmother's dress shop. She had a little dress shop down in the New Forest, down in the south of England, and I was quite young. I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I would witness my mother and my grandmother going up to London every few months and returning with news that the summer was going to be white and next spring was yellow or something like that. And I thought, what Delphic oracle is this that they have in London that makes these predictions? And I was very confused about this, and I asked my mum, where they'd been, and of course they'd been to fashion shows, and they came back with lots of bags of samples, and they would order dresses, and they would put them into their window, and they would have the magazine of Vogue or Harper's Bazaar or these industry publications, and the women of the village would come and they would queue for the opening at 10 o'clock in the morning. My grandmother was quite a late riser, and she would come down like a little bit sort of like the Queen, and open the shop, and these ladies would stream in, and she would give them a fabulous service. She would reinvent their identities. They would leave looking glorious and probably bought, two or three more dresses than they fully intended to. And I just, it slowly dawned on me that, there was some fantastic value transaction here. It was very emotional. It was very profitable. And there was something going on here. And I also realized when I was invited to pack empty boxes as pretend Christmas presents for the window at Christmas time, there was a certain theatre involved as well. And when I eventually, a lot later, became a proper designer and eventually a service designer, and we can talk about what that is because nobody knows, but the idea that we develop experiences, design experiences in all sorts of contexts, I realized that that fabulous lesson that I'd learnt and that understanding that actually there were people called designers in Paris or Milan or London that were actually creating visions of future fashions and lots of things, in fact. And that was a big penny drop. Probably a bit later than that, but I realized there was this thing called design when I was searching for some sort of purpose in life.
So on that note, Clive, I think just help orientate us. What, when most people use the word design, what
Mm.
do they mean? Because I know you have a different definition, but I'd like to start with like, just give us the 101 basic, like, what is design?
Yeah, well, I've probably done myself a disservice by starting with fashion because you're right. Most people think design is an act of fashion in some way, and perhaps they think of redesigning their kitchen or redesigning their garden. Um, my experience of design and my definition of design is much, much broader than that because for me, design is an act that a lot of us are involved in without realizing it when we make decisions that perhaps affect other people. But design is a verb where we make conscious decisions and we create things that people can use, people can find value in. And we can understand that when it's something like a car or my mobile phone, or, a hugely understood part of design. Um, but also you can design systems and you can design the health service. You can design the experience of going to your GP. You can, and I have designed lots of experiences in banks and financial services. Somebody is making a decision about what it's like to join a bank. And that is an act of design, and we can do it accidentally and badly, or we can do it well and make sure we're empathetic to people and we use the tools of design, the processes, same processes that I might have used to design a product, to actually design an experience and a service, hence the expression service design, which has become my passion and interest. And indeed, I was head of the course at the Royal College of Art.
So let's take that because to design an experience sounds a bit weird. Like most people, most of the time we just experience experiences.
Mm, mm,
So when you're saying you're going to design or help companies, organizations, charities design an experience, we're talking about a place in time, in space.
mm.
Where are we, Clive?
All those things. My my first real realization that we could design services, we could design experiences, actually came when I worked for the mobile phone company Orange, and I think it serves as a good explanation. You remember Orange eventually became EE, and it's still sort of going along. I took on a job there that was described as design, and they had not really defined it very well to their cost. But what I realized was that when we as customers experience something like a mobile phone, we see adverts. We perhaps go to a store that is selling us phones. We see phones, we see descriptions and prices. We have perhaps people helping us or hindering us in making a choice because we don't know they've got an invisible incentive to sell that particular phone, but they have. We then go home, we take it out of the box, we can't use it or we can use it. We do use it for time, and maybe we have to call up a call center, and maybe at the end of our contract, we have to renew or say, bye bye, I'm going to go to a different supplier. Now, that is an experience and it has many, many parts to it, humans, spaces, behaviors, brand differentiation, and all of that is dialed up at varying levels, and it's put together, and it's mostly accidental. It's the reason, and we can stick with Orange. Orange made fantastic adverts. They made us laugh, but sometimes buying the phones was not very humorous. In fact, a pain, and a contract and things like that could be painful. So that was very poorly designed experience. But actually, all those touch points, especially when you think of brand as being a sort of a glue or a behavior that links them together, then actually you can design the way the phone works, the way the shop looks, the way people speak to you. And I think perhaps the best word I can use is orchestrate or even architect that experience, because people do understand what an architect does. They don't understand what a designer does. Essentially, it's the same thing, just architects of buildings and we can see them. And designers are designing everything from all these different products, the digital interfaces, the copy in a letter. It's all design, actually. People are making decisions, and we're trying to orchestrate and architect that to be consistent and enjoyable, and probably most importantly, human centered. Does it care about you as the human user, and to some extent, the human delivering the service as well? And despite the world being very obviously caring about the planet and many other aspects of life, I still think starting with the human who's probably making a bad decision is still a good place to start.
Mhm. Brilliant. And so I think from my side, Clive, like just to put that in like my own lived experience. So going to Disney World once with my daughter at the time, and we probably stayed longer than we should have. So the first day it was like a happy, exciting, mythical experience. But on the second day, I was like, I'm sure they did that at the exact same time yesterday kind of thing. And I started to see like the patterns behind the experience. And so clearly that's the bit where design kicks in, that you want to
Yeah,
balance the regular with the for them at least, the regular with the magical kind of thing.
that's a fantastic example, actually, because we can understand that Disney has gone to great care to design every moment of your experience. But when we walk into a bank, we don't have that same feeling.
Mhm.
And yet there's still all these events happening, and people have decided that's going to be they're not going to care about that part of it, or they're going to drive the design of a part of your experience by, very severe process or something that they're very concerned about but doesn't make our life happy. And I think that sort of design from a non-human perspective, not getting the balance right between your business concerns and your customer concerns is a simplistic way of putting it.
Mm.
Often really negatively impacts not only us but actually businesses. And the big message here is if you're actually more conscious and less accidental, you're probably going to have more efficient organizations that deliver on their purpose better. And by the way, make people happier.
Can I ask a question here then? So it's part of your design and your design training and thought. How much does the human psyche come into that? The human motivations, our biases, heuristics, all that. How much do you consider that when you're doing a system, or do you do the, I know you do the trial thing, let's try it and see what happens and what people think?
Yes. Well, we steal a lot from anywhere, really. So things like behavioral science
Mm,
have driven a lot of design, but it's more a case of working with people who have expertise in that area than trying to assume that we are the experts.
right.
I would say a great service designer is an expert in absolutely nothing except the tools of service design, which are mostly about observation and listening. And then using your creativity and actually collective creativity. We think of designers as being very creative. I tend to describe them as facilitators of conversations, and the tools of co-creation, collaboration are probably the most important ones. If only to help everyone understand what their purpose is and what they're meant to be doing and not be sitting on the side having a different idea. We want to bring it all together and have a single journey and a single vision, because you get more done that way, and people are happier as well when that happens.
Hmm. And from your perspective, Clive, maybe this is too loaded a question. Like, who gets it really wrong? Like,
Just about
Who needs
everybody.
to hire you, Clive? Who needs to hire you?
Just about everybody too. It's quite difficult to spot really brilliant services. But I think having said that, there are huge improvements in the way things work. I mean, actually, the example I usually give, and it's very obvious and yet very invisible, which is the problem with great experienced design. You often don't notice it. It just happens, and you should be delighted it happens. We get very frustrated when it doesn't happen, when we
Mm,
can't find a website. We have horrible frequently asked questions, or people are rude, or whatever it might be. But actually, the UK government, uh, gov.uk, is an extraordinary and radical revolution. When you follow the 10, 15 years story, every government department used to have its own website, its own logo, its own copywriters. Everyone was totally different. Nobody was connected. There was no concept of delivering a service to a citizen. It was mostly about their own departmental concerns. The revolution that said, and started by Martha Lane Fox, actually, the lastminute.com founder. She wrote a damning report about how appalling the government was at delivering services to its citizens and how inefficient and expensive it was to deliver them. All these different websites, all these different forms, all these different, I don't know, printing perforated tax discs for your cards. Remember those days? Well,
Mm.
that's all gone, right? It's all simple, trying to get rid of acronyms, not always succeeded, but there is a desire to get rid of acronyms, to use common usable language, to have a single point of entry into all government services and really design them really, really well. Getting a passport, getting a driving license, all these things are immeasurably simpler and better. So they're very digital examples, but actually they were designed as services, and they have been tremendously impactful. And I did get frustrated at the last election. I think it was the Private Eye podcast said, well, surely politicians have done something good. And they said, yeah, they got rid of all those horrible systems, and gov.uk is fantastic. And I was screaming at the radio, it wasn't them, it was the designers. But I do have to admit, it was a political incentive to do something and invite
mm.
the designers in to sort it out. That was, of course, the trigger and the start. But that's one of those invisible things we hardly notice, but it's actually really good.
Brilliant. And so, kind of going along Sam's train of thought here,
Mm,
if we're thinking about internal services, so services to employees such as mental health, often they're delivered as an intervention, for
mm.
example. Like we will improve presenteeism by getting a therapy dog, for example. Like that's the intervention there. Whereas you're saying, no, step back, think of it as a service.
Always step back. Yes, I think you're right. I mean, one of the battles I have is with, I'm not saying that doesn't work, but the battle against people solutionizing too quickly without understanding the context and actually having empathy. If there's only one quality to anybody who wants to be a designer, it's not artistic creativity, it's empathy. We're designing for someone else.
Mm.
It's our duty to actually use some of the tools I'm not going to go into detail, but there are design methods that we might use when we design all sorts of things that we can reuse in a more intangible service way. And we do have a very simple model that basically says just discover what's going on without judgment by listening and observing, and use that knowledge that you gain to then analyze what does success look like, not how you're going to achieve it, but what does success look like, and then decide, then use your creativity to generate solutions, perhaps lots of solutions that we try out. You mentioned our propensity to try things out on a small basic level to understand whether they are likely to work, or if they work but they need to be designed better to remove any barriers, any problems. And all this might sound like a bother, but it's not. It's a small investment in time and effort, and it's nothing compared to the cost and time and effort that's required to rework something that you've delivered when you find out it doesn't work because you didn't observe and listen to people. And in essence, my version of design is exactly that. Listen and observe, get it right before you build it. but the world is full, especially the technology world, of people who make assumptions about other people,
Yeah.
believe they're clever, have the right idea, build it at great speed and cost, and then find out it doesn't suit the people, and it actually wasn't solving the problem they had anyway.
And
And
they
there's
do
a
it
lot
based on their own opinion, don't they? And their own perception,
completely.
and with no research and no sort of, I believe that this is right, and therefore this is what we're going to do.
Have you met a CEO before then? Maybe you
Oh,
have.
yeah, yeah. So I've got a question from that then, because you were saying that we as individuals contribute to the design, whether unconsciously or consciously. If we are we complicit then in maintaining poor design and poor service by just going along with it? Are we then complicit in that? Because this is where Luke and I talk about, do the people change first or do the systems change first? Are we, by not challenging it, we are complicit in the system changing the same, staying the same?
I would absolutely agree with that statement. Complicit is quite a term, isn't it? But
Mm,
yes, I think we are. And I think, there's lots of reasons why we don't want to change things. Um, I think in my book, I say, for most people, the status is quo, and they quite
mm,
like that. And it's
mm,
easier
yeah.
that way. And um, and we probably feel that's fine. For me, it's a lack of balance between considering the decision-making elements. I mean, if you're in a business, for example, the system that's more in your elements, the system that's higher in your visibility tends to be economic, and perhaps technology or capability of your organization, usually quite inward looking. Quite simply, we try and balance that with, is what you're doing of human benefit as well? Is it desirable to a customer? Is it going to inadvertently have an impact on society you weren't anticipating? And we're just trying to balance up the effort put into cutting cost or
Mm,
making money, and having an organization that's lean and efficient and you feel proud of, but it's usually out of balance with the human element, and
mm,
that's the message we're trying to get across as best we can.
mm. I get that. And so then can I ask you, Clive, have you ever been asked to apply your sort of systems analysis to education system? What's your perception of it? Because having read what you've done and thinking about it, I feel that the education system is very much outcome and results based and political outcome based
Mm.
rather than what's right for the people involved in the system.
Yes, so I think that's clearly true across lots of touch points, from uh, Ofsted to everyday educational behaviour. I've got a slight sort of interest here because I'm a trustee of the Design and Technology Association, which actually delivers the kinds of tools that I'm talking about into primary and secondary education incredibly successfully. During a time when really it shouldn't have had to do that, but it did that because there wasn't provision, there wasn't any emphasis on the kind of creativity that it turns out we need more than ever right now, especially in the age of AI.
Mm,
And working in somewhere like a bank where I did work, the bright kids there who wanted to learn what creative thinking was because it had been bashed out of them by the education
mm,
system, was really amazing to see, actually. Um, but to answer your question, I think it's tough. We get it. There's legacy systems that are difficult to change. We try and adapt and move around them in any organizational infrastructure and system. But my wife's in the educational system, so I see that. And in a funny way, obviously was at the Royal College of Art, but I also teach on the apprenticeship schemes now, which are, actually a really interesting, different model of learning inside your job and things like that. So perhaps a rather freer, less systemic way of teaching. I don't have an organisation around me, apart from Ofsted, of course, which is a shock. I'm just catching up with. But, so I hope I'm answering your question. I think
yeah.
you're right. I think there is a complacency as well as a
Mm,
complicitness, and um, finding ways of understanding that and showing that people can have agency over change, actually. And if we do it in a coordinated, kind of understanding way, listening and observing, as I say, and building together and collaborating together on trying to improve things, that feels a much more positive alternative to the more sort of, well, I'm just going to shout louder, or I'm going to put my opinion forward, and there's going to be 20 opinions in a staff room or a conference or whatever it might be. I think we've got to try and get over that and be more collaborative and be more creative and not be fearful of that, not being fearful of judgment until we actually try and make change, and then we have to be responsible for the impact of that change.
Hmm. If I can jump in here, Clive, there's something in my mind which is often people think of design as a very technical profession, vocation, and yet you've kind of centered empathy
Mm,
at the
yeah.
heart of this, which might surprise a lot of people. And so, whether we're in the education system or many other types of public service, like empathy may be lacking often. So, why have you kind of focused on this emotional idea of empathy as key for designers?
Well, let's just firstly say there are, when you want to design something specifically, you do need some ability, some skill. If you want to design a great digital app, there are, a real designer will do it better than my mum. On the other hand, getting my mum to tell me what she wants might allow the skilled designer to do a better job. So there's that relationship between skill and design. But as soon as you talk about design, you talk about creativity, that immediately feels like a sort of personal act, like an artistic act of creativity would be. But I think a design act of creativity is using your personal powers by all means, but not enforcing your creative will on people. It's using your creativity to give other people agency, to give other people what works for them. And ironically, I think the great lesson in all the design methods and tools that exist out there is that it is listening to people, it is observing people, finding the things they don't even necessarily express to you that drives innovation, that drives creativity, that drives better solutions, not having my own opinion and being in a little private room trying to be creative. It's much more creative to go out there and look at things and learn from them. So I think it's very intuitive actually for a designer, and so intuitive they don't realize they're doing it. But I realized early on in my design training, that what I was doing, if I was being asked to design, it was a product design training, design a vacuum cleaner. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to look at people vacuuming and you're going to say, oh, they're having a problem with that corner. Right, I'll design a better corner tool. And that's essentially what we're saying here. That triggers creativity, it triggers innovation by seeing what people do. And rather than looking at vacuum cleaners, we can look at systems, we can look at how people work together in education or healthcare or banks, or so many different systems that are complicated and multi-touch point, and that's why I call them services and service experiences. It's a much more holistic view, but all the same methods and behaviors. Design really is more of a behavior than a skill, and empathy is 100% there because you're not actually doing it for yourself, apart from the pleasure of getting it right and seeing somebody going, oh, I can get into the corners better now.
How do you get around the sort of the mindset of the people you're working with to start thinking differently and embracing and working in a different way that they have, especially when you're dealing with well-established mindsets? How do you do that, Clive? How do you have strategies that you do that? Is it dependent on personality? Is it part of learning how to be a good systems designer?
Yes, and that's really by being every day of my life forever trying to help. What I do not do is put a sign up saying I'm a service designer, I'm better than you, you've got to do what I say. I do not do that. Right? I mean, to be honest, what I do and has been most effective for me, when you realize that nobody wants anyone called a designer in a room, usually until they've all made the difficult decisions, and then we'll let you make it pretty at the end. That is the perception. But when you do get in at their beginning, and you start to facilitate discussions and you start to offer creative solutions that other people have not thought of, because people tend not to think that way, you begin to bring value to the conversation. But the most effective technique I've always done is I've quietly gone and found the most broken thing and then fixed it. because I know I have the faith. I know that this stuff works. And I know that if we listen and we create practical, but perhaps different and better solutions, and we are able to deliver them rather than just think about them, we don't write reports saying this is what you should do. We tell stories about how you could do something and what the impact will be. And maybe we'll have a prototype that says, look, we tried this out and it worked.
Mm.
So it's this bit by bit building of trust and confidence through results, through impact. It could even be a tiny bit, but I'm pretty sure that I or any of my students could go into almost any situation and create evidence that thinking a little bit more like this, having more empathy, observing, taking away your presumptions, assumptions, and desire to be the clever solution creator in the room, getting rid of all that has
Mhm.
impact almost immediately. And I think that's why, when Luke started talking about systems, I could see how the behavior we have as designers does work in complex systems, because we're not telling people what to do until we've all kind of understood how the system works and what little levers we can pull and whether they work or not. Okay.
Mm.
I think what Luke does a lot of is he's like, really, 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 and it's really. So
Okay.
that's what I
Maybe I try
love.
that.
Well, okay, so the big question for you now, Clive, really is in your book, you're talking about redesigning thinking. So if design has been going to various degrees in improving services experience, improving life benefits, why are you now saying actually we need to redesign the way we think about design? What's happened there?
Well, the book is definitely aimed at non-designers, though at the end of every chapter, I sort of say, if you're a normal person, this is how you can redesign your thinking. And if you're a designer, this is how you could persuade someone to redesign their thinking.
Mm.
But the point is, it's not just about designers, it is about all of us. It's about all the components of the system. It's about people waking up to understanding that their decisions maybe aren't good enough or not balanced enough or simply wrong, and defending them rather than trying to put them right. There's a lot of behavior that goes with the way we tend to make decisions. And this idea that, and of course, it's a pun on design thinking, which has been a bit of a trend where, people the last 20 years were told, well, if you think a little bit more like a designer, you'll have some better outcomes, which is sort of what I'm saying as well. But it was appropriated, I think would be the word, by lots of management consultants, and that reputation of that particular term declined. So I wanted to, as the pun, if you like, redesigning thinking, move it away and into how are we thinking? And if we look at how people have made mistakes, we can understand how you could have prevented them, have a greater understanding of the consequences of their decisions, create more balanced decisions, stop and listen before you solutionize. It's not rocket science, but it is changing the normal way of thinking and hence redesigning thinking. And I have to tell you the story that it wasn't my idea to come up with that phrase. It was Lord Bird, John Bird, the wonderful um, crossbencher in the House of Lords and of course founder of the Big Issue, ex convict, drunk, bad person on the streets of Glasgow when they were 18, who has become this rather glorious and impressive person. And in fact, at the Royal College of Art, we had been working with a big issue coming out of COVID because suddenly everything was changed. I mean, no one's got any cash and all that sort of stuff. How do you redesign the relationship with a homeless person so that you can give them a hand up rather than a hand out, which is, of course, the motto of Big Issue and the purpose of it. And we'd also been doing work with prisoners, and again, you wouldn't expect and refugees. You wouldn't expect designers to do projects like that, but that is actually what we're redesigning. So he came along to the one of the work in progress shows to see the work of the students, and demanded a bottle of wine when he got there, and I managed to steal one from the Chancellor's office and things like that. So the evening was going swimmingly, but he had been talking about how we need to reinvent the way we create policy in government, that we're not creating policy that is fair to people, that builds an equitable society, who don't care about those who are left behind. and goodness, that's coming home to roost now, isn't it? And but when he saw the work of the students, and I asked him, if you could redesign something, what would you redesign? And he said, I'd redesign thinking. And he had been talking about reinventing thinking and realized, no, no, we're going to redesign thinking. So I then wrote the book, went back to him and said, you remember you said that thing? Well, here's the book. And would you write the forward? Which he did.
Real.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So I managed to keep the title. And but for me, it worked absolutely perfectly because it's the emphasis is in the right way. It's the emphasis to all of us who wouldn't know about design, and yet I think it's such a useful, pragmatic set of tools to help us make better decisions on behalf of others, which is, just about what everyone is doing.
Mhm. So have you like captured your definition of rethought design then, Clive, which is around helping to engage in intentional thinking to help others? Is that the closest we'll get to a definition from you?
Yes, I think. Well, do you know what? I'm going to quickly. Not sure how quickly I can do this.
Take
Pull
it.
up, pull up some words because one of the great. There were two things, two statements that influenced me a lot. When I uh, when I was a young designer, I worked for a fantastic guy called Bill Moggeridge, who really was an amazing British designer. He should be much more famous than people like Terence Conran or anyone like that. I mean, he went out to California and exported European designers who created all the beautiful, people like Johnny Ive come from that tradition of European designers going to the US and working in the US technology world. And he said to me something along the lines of, few people think about it, but there is nothing made in the world that doesn't have a design decision in it. And that was one of those things that made me realize that, yeah, it's true. There is a lot out there that people are making decisions about, and in a way, that is, a design decision. So later on, I discovered the writings of Herbert Simon, and he said a very convoluted statement, which I'm trying to find on. Here we go. He said, everyone designs who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones. It's a slightly mealy-mouthed sentence, and I put it into Chat GPT a couple of times, and it came out as anyone who plans to improve things by changing them is a designer. And that's kind of where I am. And he went on, actually, he said something else later on, which isn't so often quoted when people talk about definitions of design. He said, the intellectual activity that produces material artifacts, for which I would also add, and services and experience,
Hmm.
is no different fundamentally from the one that prescribes remedies for a sick patient or the one that devises a new sales plan for a company or a social welfare policy for a state. And he was saying it in the 60s, Nobel Prize winning economist. And when I came across that, I thought, well, it's been lying there in plain sight for decades. But that's it. It's an intellectual activity that we can apply to all these different things. It happens to be called design because design is a verb. We are designing a set of actions. A lot of people say, oh, you shouldn't use the design word. It's polluted by people's, belief it's something else. I said, no, 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 come on. It's a human activity. We've done it since Greek vases, and we're designing health services just really badly. We just need to design them better. So I'm
So,
sticking.
is there a particular system that you would love to get your hands on?
I, well, yeah,
And can you tell us?
crikey. I mean, democracy. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, to be honest, I think the health service, because it's quite close at times to being brilliant,
Mm.
and it has an amazing, there aren't many things in life where the vast majority of people care about it and want it to be right. And yet, in many cases, the actual experience of events is pretty dreadful. And that's tremendously heartbreaking.
Mm.
And I know there are actually who, nobody would know. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of people in the health service who are service designers who are battling away in little corners to try and effect change. But then, a new policy comes along, or a new chief executive is appointed in a trust and they don't get it and they don't want it. Everything crumbles away. It's a classic story. That's why I'm aiming my book at precisely those people. That I'm not sure they're reading it yet. But we owe a better designed health service, considering it's got so many components that are right, and the emotional sense of purpose in the people who work for it, and yet somehow the systems and the touch points and the clunkiness, and it's chaotic and sometimes totally wonderful, but often very messy and horrible.
Mm.
And that's a great shame. I think that's a real tragedy.
Well, if we
That's what
take
I think. Sorry, go on, Luke.
so I was just going to take that point a little bit further, which is sometimes it feels like in the world of like AI bots and you've got to log into this website, like this term I heard, in shitification, like everything is just getting a little bit crapper basically.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and that was directly aimed at service designers when that word came out, Clive. So I think in part what you're saying is when things are designed badly, designed cheaply, designed to be efficient but not effective, that's the loss of the intentional intellectual pursuit of design that can occur. Is that
I,
fair?
I hope service designers aren't being blamed for enshittification. I think it's exactly the wrong kind of thinking that is causing that. We care more about the system than the people. We care more about our organization and making our lives easy, or we only look at the things, that immediately concern us. When the government digital services started work to recreate the way we interface with government, they set a load of principles, and they're really helpful principles, like, don't overcomplicate things, do less, great things. That their first one was designed for the user, and all the managers in government thought they were the users,
Mm.
right? So they had to put an asterisk on it saying, not you, you idiot, the people you're actually serving,
Yeah.
right? And it's that fundamental, lack of care, lack of understanding that you're not doing it for you. But of course, your boss, your salary, your incentivization, your motivation is all pointed that way, down on you. You're measured every year. I saw it in the banks. If you had a good idea and you couldn't deliver it in 12 months, it would never happen. So you just start again every 12 months, every bonus cycle. It's like, oh God. Nothing will ever get done. And I'm amazed the bank I worked for is still pretty much exactly the same as I left it, whenever that was 10 years ago. And you just think, oh, tragic.
And this
So,
is kind of where Luke and I sort of talk about things, because we will ask you this question in a minute: what do you change first, the people or the system?
mm,
And my argument would be that a lot of people involved, particularly at higher levels, don't have the emotional understanding, for a variety of reasons, some of which we discuss in other podcasts, to embrace this concept, and also the ability to say, I don't know everything and I might be wrong here. I think there's a lot of failure for that in leadership. And I would argue you need to change that before you can change the system.
I would absolutely agree. And I think there is good news out there, actually. I think we are seeing leaders who do care more about that. Not necessarily the majority, but in business, there are an increasing number of purpose-led businesses
Mm.
who, of course, they want to make enough profits they can pay everybody and keep doing what they're doing, but they have another purpose. It might be sustainability, the number of sustainable fashion brands. I went to the Blue Earth Summit last year. There's a huge systemic problem. Expecting to see tree huggers, and I saw sharply dressed, entrepreneurially minded business leaders with startups and big companies, absolutely determined not to take this shit anymore and do something about it. Um, and so there's lots of good stuff going out there as well. But I think you're absolutely right. Leaders our concept of leadership is very weak. Concept of leaders from people who are led. You know, an awful lot of people quite like to be micromanaged and told exactly what to do, actually. And you give them responsibility and they go, "Whoa, wobbly." And that's a problem. Educating people to have good leaders, I think, is as much part of it. And you can have brilliant leaders, and there are brilliant leaders out there. And then it percolates down to, you know, people who've been there 25 years. I hate to say it, but it usually is those sorts of people who are comfortable in the way we've always done it like this. One of my students, heroic student, went to work in a government department and she really tried to change it. She might have used more diplomacy along the way, but however, she really went to try and change the system as a single service designer. And in some ways, she had a massive impact on it. But in an unfortunate sense, it slightly burnt her out and she had to leave. And when you take on a system single-handedly, you'll know that's what happens. So we have to try and be more organized about it, be more collaborative and coherent, and the messages have to go right the way through the system of people. I mean, I can't uncorrelate the two. You know? Yeah, and you see the behaviors of different parts of that system that is very much about people. I mean, you asked the question earlier on about, you know, human behavior and stuff, and I'd say that's where sometimes we're bad because we can't always cope with people who just think we're useless. You know, what do I want a
Yeah.
designer in the room at my ministry for? In fact, there are ministries who've banned the word of use design. You know, ministries who really need it. You know, they said
Okay.
we will not allow anyone who's called a designer to come and work here. And you just, how 21st century is that? Not.
Well, let's give us hope, Clive. So where do you see the future of design going then? So if we're redesigning thinking, if I want to be a designer or I'm being intentional about the change that I want to make in the world, where do you see the optimistic points for design to make a real difference? Because it sounds like in designing experiences, there is this opportunity to reimagine, to do things differently if you have, like you said, the right tools, but also the empathy with it. So give us some inspiration, Clive.
Well, on the back of the book, I said, and I thought about this a lot, the world doesn't work. And I thought, no, maybe I'm over exaggerating. And then I realized, no, it really doesn't work. It was the intuitification and all these things we've been talking about. And what happens is that people finally work out they have to listen. They have to rethink this. And, you know, I'm in the business of training organizations of usually of non-designers to think, to rethink, redesign their thinking, sorry, not rethinking their design, or maybe that too. But um, but they gloriously welcome it. They have moments of massive epiphany when they go, "Oh my goodness, our system is terrible. Let's reimagine it." And they do go on that journey. They love the journey. It's fun. They become more impactful, purposeful, happier people because of it. You know, I've worked in the last few years. I've worked in the Bank of England twice. I've worked in fire and rescue service. I've worked for loads of social housing corporations who can't work out how to understand their residents. And then they do when we go through this and to see it have impact on people, and then they can carry on every day of their lives thereafter thinking differently. They have redesigned their thinking. And you know, I live in the most glorious bubble where I only meet lovely people like you, Luke, and you, Sam, and people who care and people who might head up companies who are really trying to make change. If I didn't look at the news and read a newspaper, I'd think the world was amazing because there's actually loads of people trying to get it right, and they're in prison services and big companies and tiny companies and you know, when you take people on this journey, the feedback we get in our training companies and the people who talk about us about this thing and how it's helped them and it's given them insight and clarity. You know, the problem is, how do we scale it up? How do I benignly infect the whole world? And in a way, I suppose the book is my first sort of jab at creating a germ to
Mm.
get it out there. And there's a long way to go, and it probably won't happen in my lifetime. But it's a bit like jazz, isn't it? You know, jazz never quite makes it. I suspect that's how design will be forever, but hopefully growing in influence and occasionally winning a Mercury Prize.
Clive, thank you so much. Time has whizzed by as what's happened, to be honest. And I know Luke and I could ask you, quite frankly, a lot more questions. I think I'd like to set a challenge to you and your students to look at the education system. And, because Luke and I are constantly having conversations with people going, where do we go? Where do we go? What does it need to look like to be the future and things? So I think, maybe look at the education system as a system that isn't
Wow.
working.
Yes.
Clearly,
Hmm.
what can we do? Sort of thing.
Well, I'm getting tremendous insights through the Design Technology Association into
Mm.
education that I didn't have before. And I apologize for saying healthcare earlier on. I should have said education, shouldn't I? But
No,
you want to ask me the
it's
question
fine.
again, we can
We're
redo
all right. That's
it.
fine.
No, but do you know, I mean, quite clearly, there's so much we could do. And that's another example of fantastic, purpose-driven, brilliant people
Mm,
trying to overcome pretty horrendous systemic obstacles. So,
mm.
yeah, okay.
There are superb people out there doing it, yeah. I have a few questions to ask you now. What is one system that you cannot live without?
Um, well, it kind of, mm, I mean, really annoying. It's kind of technology and the internet,
Mm,
if I'm allowed to call that a system. I mean, I always think I would not have survived for half an hour in a world that, didn't have an iPhone telling me what
no.
I'm doing and didn't have stuff. And, I guess I could have written a book longhand, but oh my goodness, So that whole system has been incredible. But at the same time, I've had to remove myself from elements of that system, like social media. I mean, I'm just off it, apart from LinkedIn, but mostly off it. And I've turned all my notifications off, and I'm a happier person because of it. I don't need that little red thing that says I've got 25 whatever. So with massive enablement has come problems I didn't even imagine I'd ever suffer from. I mean, real anxiety. When the algorithms changed on X, it was what's going on? My life's just got unhappy.
You see,
Off.
now I would argue with you there that what you've
Come on.
done, Clive,
Mm,
is instead of looking what is my system of interacting with social media, you've
mm,
gone, bugger it, I'm coming off it. Now
mm.
that's not a good system designer behavior, is it?
Um, well, I think I was just frightened of the time and effort I would have to put in to that particular, trolling
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
And sometimes you have to make a decision to do something maybe you're more likely to succeed in, which was in my case, writing a book
Mm,
and not worrying
absolutely.
about what people were saying about me on Twitter. So,
And we're
so
glad for the book.
I
Yeah.
apologize. I can't solve everything, Sam.
No, no, that's fine. That's fine. I accept your sort of your failures and let's embrace your positives as a person instead. No, clearly. Okay, so next question here is if you could travel back in history and witness one event, you cannot change it, you cannot get involved, you only witness it, what would you like to see?
Gosh, and I've had no forewarning of these
No,
questions.
none at all. We don't like that.
What would I like to see? Yeah. Oh God. I mean, there's some historical things that have clearly made such a massive difference to, um, I can't imagine what the world was like before we accidentally discovered penicillin and realized we could stop people dying in
Mm,
huge numbers.
mm.
That little bit of dust that came through the window and landed in a petri dish. We still don't know where it came from, do they? That's extraordinary moment in human history. If there's more sort of human acts, um, then probably dramatic things like working out that slavery was a really bad idea and we should do something about it seems
Mhm.
pretty important.
So the sort of person that started that sort of thought
Yeah,
cycle
the
and
movements behind that. I know
mm,
none of them were perfect, but eventually the system changed.
mm,
And it was very embedded, as we find out when we go to our historic houses and see our museums. And in a way, that's probably one of the biggest systemic changes I can think of in a way,
yeah.
and the most sort of benign for society. So, gosh, I thought this was just a nice little friendly podcast.
Listen, we're here. We fool you. You know, we've got this sweet little act going of Pinky and the Brain, where Luke's the brain and I'm Pinky. But then I will throw in some humdingers there for you occasionally.
Thanks for warning me.
What would you like to promote? Your book, obviously. Tell us about your book.
Oh, well, I mean, promote. Oh, gosh. Well, I've written a book and I like to tell people about it.
Great.
As I explained, it's called Redesigning Thinking. It actually captures um, the kind of what it was pompously called a masterclass that I developed for the Royal College of Art when I was there in service design for completely normal people. And we used to have doctors and all sorts of people, even people from teachers from education, people from the local authorities, people from big businesses. They would come and spend 2 days having me tell them this is what design can do for you. This is what these systems and processes and behaviors and empathy minded design is like. And it was people loved it. So I thought, well, I finally found the thing I'm good at and I quite enjoy doing, finally. And so in a sense, this book is bottling
Mm,
that. But of course, when you start writing about stuff, you can have loads more fun and you can talk to lots of people who are doing it for real and share positive, wonderful stories. And you can be very rude about the people who are getting it wrong.
mm,
Like, I don't know, the COVID track and trace system,
mm.
37 billion pounds later. Whoops, that wasn't designed very well. And even things like the Post Office Horizon, I think there are
Yeah.
examples of terrible, tragic misdesigns. And I do include, I do see that as a design problem. I'm not shy. It probably wasn't a designer, but this is my point. People are making decisions and they have impact. Therefore, you're a designer.
Mm.
So it allows me to articulate that, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And it got published about 3 months ago, and I've no idea how well it's selling, but lots of people are telling me they're enjoying it and they enjoyed it
Brilliant.
on their beaches on holiday. So I'm very delighted they took it away with them. And I think it's not an academic book. It's an argument for all the things I've been saying to you, that design is
Mm.
something that we could all embrace and we could all benefit from thinking about thinking that way and redesigning our thinking. So I'm hoping it's going to be the start of being able to have that argument with lots more people. I did a talk last week to government. There are hundreds of people across loads of
Mm.
departments listening to it. I did a talk yesterday to a bank, and everyone's nodding and going, yeah, 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 okay. So, keep going.
You're spreading the word.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Clive. Thank you so much. Luke said you were going to be a cracker of a podcast guest. I was like, really? But yes, he was right. You have. Thank you so much. I'm just going to ask Luke, what's your biggest takeaway from today, Luke?
Like Clive always fills my head with like a hive of activity. But I think for me, it just comes back to this the power of empathy.
Mm,
Like that idea that you can recognize the emotions of other people and make your decisions based off of those emotions, not just your own. I think is just so incredibly powerful. And the way in which Clive positions it within this suite of experiences, products, technology, the empathy, that human aspect of connection still matters
mm.
was just wonderful to hear.
And mine is quite similar because I come from the people side of thing, and that what I'm doing is by educating not educating people, but improving metacognition to understand why you think, how you think, and where your biases can come from. By doing that, it then puts people in the right mindset to be more open to not criticism, but to reviewing things and improving things. Clive, are you pleased with us as students that that's our biggest takeaways from you today? Is that what you want people to take away?
I'm gobsmacked.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're very welcome. That's
Pleasure,
see.
Clive.
And that's what we wanted. So thank you again, Clive, and thank you to the millions of you that are obviously going to be listening to this. Please subscribe if you liked it. And as always, if you didn't like it, listen again because you're wrong and you need to change your mind on it. So without further ado, we will speak to you again. Clive, thank you. I really hope I get to meet you again in the future. And Luke, my brain to my pinky. Say goodbye and we'll see you all soon.
Pleasure. Take care. Thank you, Clive.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks, Clive.